Okay, let's think about this for a second. What if the device you're holding right now, or maybe just wearing, could actually read your thoughts? Like before you even say them.
Right. Or what if it could, I don't know, subtly nudge what you think about?
Exactly. It sounds completely like something out of a movie, doesn't
It
it?
really does. But those questions, they're becoming incredibly real and fast. It's all because of the advancements we're seeing in brain-computer interfaces, BCIs for short.
So, welcome everyone to the deep dive. We've really gathered a serious pile of sources on this. Everything from really dense scientific papers, neuroethics reports, the heavy stuff.
All the way to news articles and what companies are saying.
Yeah, a real mix. And our mission today is basically to dig through all of it and pull out the key pieces. Like, what are BCIs really? What can they actually do now versus what's maybe coming soon?
And maybe the biggest piece, what are the implications for us, for society, for how we even think about thinking? It's a wild area where science fiction is kind of bumping right up against reality.
And the stuff we've read really lays out the critical points we need to start talking about.
Okay, so first things first. What is this technology? A brain-computer interface. At its heart, it's really just a system. It's designed to make a direct communication path.
A bridge, kind of?
Exactly, a bridge between a brain and some kind of external device,
hmm
like connecting the biological wetware to the electronic hardware.
Got it. Letting brains and machines actually talk to each other. And the sources seem to break down how they talk into two main ways.
That's right. Two main functions. The first one is basically about reading the brain. So
hmm
these BCIs, they record activity. It could be electrical signals, could be blood flow.
Brain's activity.
Yeah, signals. Then they try to interpret those signals, often using some pretty complex AI now, and send that interpretation off to a device to do something,
Mm.
like move a cursor or provide some feedback.
Okay, so decoding what the brain is putting out
Yeah.
in the second way.
The second way flips it. It's about writing to the brain. These BCIs actually try to influence or change brain activity. They might stimulate certain pathways or maybe suppress others. They're sending information in.
Reading and writing, getting stuff out, putting stuff in, okay. But how do they actually make the connection? Because the sources talk about really different methods. Some sound pretty intense.
Yeah, that's a really key distinction. Invasive versus non-invasive. Invasive means, well, something actually goes inside your skull.
Inside. Like what?
Things like cortical implants. These are like little grids of electrodes placed right on the surface of the brain. Or maybe you've heard about Neuralink's tech, sometimes called Neuralace.
Vaguely.
That involves inserting these really tiny, flexible threads with electrodes directly into the brain tissue itself. And then there's deep brain stimulation, DBS, where electrodes are implanted deeper to send electrical pulses that's already used for things like Parkinson's.
Wow, okay. That's serious stuff, surgery and all that. What about the other kind, the non-invasive?
Right, non-invasive stays outside the skull. So you might know some of these. EEG, that's electroencephalography. You wear a cap with electrodes, measures
Right.
brain waves.
Okay, seen those.
Then there's fMRI, functional MRI, that looks at changes in blood flow in the brain to see what parts are active. Now, there are also ways to stimulate from the outside, like TDCS, transcranial direct current stimulation, or TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. They use weak electrical currents or magnetic pulses on the scalp.
So invasive gets you closer, better signal, higher precision, probably. But yeah, much riskier, more complex. Non-invasive is easier, safer, but maybe the signal isn't quite as good right now.
That's pretty much the trade-off, yeah, though the non-invasive tech is improving really quickly.
But the sources are pretty clear on this point, right? Despite all the buzz, most of us aren't, like, using BCIs day to day.
Oh, absolutely not. That's maybe the most crucial piece of current reality to get across. This stuff is still overwhelmingly stuck in labs and clinical trials. There are massive hurdles, scientific, technical hurdles.
What kind of hurdles?
Well, things like, how do you make an implant that lasts safely inside someone's head for decades? How do you reliably figure out what these incredibly complex brain signals actually mean? And how do you make the non-invasive tech precise enough for complex tasks? It's really, really important to separate the hype and the long-term dreams from where we actually are.
So very early days for widespread use.
Very early. We need to be realistic about that.
Okay, so given it is early days, what can BCIs actually do right now, or what looks really promising, like just around the corner, based on the sources we read?
Well, the most established uses, the ones really making a difference already, are definitely in medicine. BCIs are literally restoring senses that people have lost.
Like hearing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Cochlear implants are a great example. We don't always think of them as BCIs, but they fit the definition perfectly. They take sound, turn it into neural signals the brain can understand as hearing. Or retinal implants doing something similar for sight, giving some vision back.
That's just incredible, giving back abilities.
It really is. And they're showing real promise for other things, too. Treating chronic pain, helping with phantom limb sensations after amputation. There's also some fascinating work on maybe augmenting memory.
Augmenting memory.
Yeah, or even helping treat things like cravings and addiction. The idea is you might be able to tweak the brain's underlying drive and reward systems. One source mentioned neuroscientist Moran Cerf, talking about the possibility of decoupling a sensory desire, like you really want that chocolate cake, from its actual biological purpose, like needing energy or nutrients, separating the feeling from the evolutionary need.
Wow. That's a deep thought right there.
Yeah.
Separating desire from need.
It really is. And then there are potential treatments for neurological issues, Parkinson's we mentioned, but also depression, ADHD. Sometimes they use BCI-driven training games to help people learn to regulate their own brain activity.
And helping people with severe disabilities. That seems like a huge area.
Absolutely critical. Restoring some movement for people with paralysis, for instance, or enabling communication for people with locked-in syndrome.
Where they're conscious but totally unable to move or speak.
Exactly. So generating synthetic speech just from their brain signals, that's a massive goal.
Yeah.
And it's something Neuralink, for example, has said is a key initial focus.
Okay, those medical applications alone are just, well, revolutionary. But the sources also talk about non-medical stuff emerging that feels quite different.
Yeah, this is where it starts to feel a bit more like that sci-fi mirror we mentioned. Researchers are definitely getting better at decoding more complex things from brain signals, like language.
Decoding language, you mean reading thoughts into words?
Kind of. Using non-invasive EEG or fMRI plus AI, they're starting to decode continuous language, turning brain activity patterns into spoken words or text on a screen. The sources mentioned lab results around 80% accuracy, but they also called it clunky.
Clunky how?
Like slow, error-prone. Imagine trying to have a conversation through a really bad translator that only gets 4 out of 5 words right and takes ages. Not practical yet, but the fact they can do it at all is a big step.
Still, decoding actual language patterns, that's something else.
It really is. And we're seeing BCI control move beyond just simple robot arms. People are controlling more complex robots, drones, even using it for art.
Art. How?
There was research mentioned called Brain Brush, where people could essentially paint using their thoughts, directing a brush on a screen.
Okay, painting by thinking.
And then there are these experiments, like one called BrainNet, where they actually link multiple people's brains via BCIs to collaborate on tasks, sort of like basic brain-to-brain communication.
Brain to brain. Okay, yeah, that's definitely pushing boundaries. And you mentioned cognitive enhancement, too, using BCIs to, like, boost brain power.
Yeah, that's another area of research, exploring if BCIs can help people regulate anxiety better, improve emotional control, maybe boost focus, memory, even speed up learning, basically fine-tuning our own cognitive knobs.
The sources also highlighted some, let's say, striking examples funded by places like DARPA, the U.S. Defense Research Agency. What were they looking into?
Right. DARPA's been a big funder here, often with goals that could have both civilian and military uses, dual use, they call it. We saw mentions of research into tech that could potentially enhance memory formation, but also maybe impair it.
Impair memory. Why?
Well, you can imagine scenarios. Also, tech to speed up learning, or even detect subtle neural responses when someone sees a target of interest, maybe for intelligence gathering.
Detecting if someone recognizes something just from their brain signals?
That seems to be the idea. And one program sounded particularly ambitious, trying to potentially influence how someone perceives a story or a narrative, reading their brain's reaction in real time to tweak the narrative, aiming for, I think the term was optimal narratives tailored to a specific individual or group.
Okay, hold on. Influencing narrative perception. Now we're way beyond just reading signals. That sounds like trying to guide thoughts.
It certainly raises those kinds of questions, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it really throws that gap into sharp relief, the gap between the amazing potential benefits and what people imagine or maybe fear this tech can do.
Which is fueled so much by pop culture, right?
Absolutely. You can't talk about BCIs without thinking of The Matrix, when Neuralink talks about symbiosis with AI, it's hard not to picture plugging into the machine.
Or episodes of Black Mirror,
Yeah,
like San Junipero with uploading consciousness. It feels weirdly close when you talk about BCIs maybe giving someone locked in a kind of digital life.
exactly. Or even something like the movie Her with the AI companion. That feels less like pure fantasy when you consider BCIs potentially enhancing emotional communication or connection with AI.
And you see it filter down, don't you? Like those viral TikTok things, the hashtag brain hack challenge, or deep threads on Reddit worrying about BCIs overriding free will.
Totally. It's really easy for that fascination to slide into, well, misinformation and anxiety. Our sources were really clear about pushing back on some common myths and hype.
Like the idea that BCIs are everywhere already.
Yeah, that's a big one. They're just not widely used outside specific medical or research contexts. Another misconception is about BCI intelligence.
Thinking the BCI itself is smart.
Right. Current systems are good at specific tasks they're trained for, but they don't have general intelligence like you or me. They rely on predefined rules, mostly. Now, integrating them with real AI in the future, that's a different conversation, but we're not there yet.
And the ultimate sci-fi dream or nightmare of downloading thoughts or uploading knowledge directly.
The sources basically say, forget about it for now. It's pure science fiction. We just don't understand the brain's code for complex thoughts, memories, feelings nearly well enough to even think about doing that. Those claims create totally unrealistic expectations.
So there's this huge gap between the perception driven by movies, hype, maybe fear, and the complex reality of where the tech actually is, which I guess brings us squarely to the really significant risks and ethical headaches that BCIs raise.
Yeah, this is where things get incredibly serious. And maybe the most fundamental concern that came up again and again in the sources is privacy.
Mental privacy.
Exactly. Accessing the neural signals that underpin our actual thoughts. It's described as getting access to a level of yourself that you literally cannot consciously hide. Your skull used to be the final barrier, right? Your thoughts were yours alone. BCIs are designed to cross that barrier.
That sounds, yeah, like the ultimate violation of privacy.
It really does.
Thank you.
It brings up these deep questions about mental privacy. Do we have a right to keep our inner thoughts, beliefs, feelings completely private, unobserved? And there's also the risk of, social pressure.
Pressure to use them.
Yeah. Might you feel forced to use a BCI and potentially share your neural data just to get a job or access some service, or even just to keep up with everyone else who is using them?
And like any computer system, they can be hacked, right?
Yeah.
Security must be a massive issue.
Huge. BCIs are vulnerable. It's not just about stealing data or money or identity theft, though that's bad enough. If it's a medical BCI, hacking it could directly threaten someone's physical safety.
Or worse.
Well, think about the potential for coercion or control. We already know early BCIs could evoke feelings, even pain. Imagine a malicious actor using that power, influencing someone's movements, their emotions, what they desire, maybe even subtly shaping their thought processes. It's a terrifying prospect.
And that idea of external control hits right at our sense of autonomy, doesn't it? Our mental self-determination, our free will.
It's a core ethical problem. Most things that influence us, advertising, arguments, they come from the outside, and we can consciously think about them, challenge them. But BCIs could potentially work directly on our neural wiring, bypassing our conscious awareness altogether. That could fundamentally mess with our sense of making our own choices.
Then there's that tricky line between using BCIs for therapy, fixing something broken, and using them for enhancement, making someone better than baseline human.
That's another minefield. What even is normal functioning? It's hard enough to define now. BCIs make it way harder. Helping someone walk again seems clearly therapeutic. Boosting someone's IQ or memory way beyond natural limits. That feels different.
And it immediately raises issues of fairness, right?
Mental discrimination. Who gets these enhancements? Only the rich. What happens to those who can't afford them or choose not to use them? You could create massive societal divides, the enhanced versus the unenhanced.
It's like a new kind of class system.
Would be. And the sources talked about the pressure. Maybe you don't want the enhancement, but you feel you have to get it just to compete in your job or even in school. Like athletes feeling pressured into doping. It could shift what society expects. Maybe enhancement becomes the new normal to be considered fully functional.
And if this tech is messing directly with our brains, what does that do to our sense of self, who we are?
Profound questions there. Identity. Psychological continuity. BCIs could really blur the lines between your mind, your body, and the technology plugged into it. How does that change how you see yourself?
Hmm.
Your sense of agency, the feeling that you are the one doing things? Do you still feel like the same person over time if parts of your cognition are technologically mediated?
Yeah.
One source used phrases like disembodied thought or soft disembodied agency. That really challenges centuries of thinking about how our minds are tied to our physical bodies and our interactions in the world.
Setting aside the philosophical, are there just plain physical safety worries?
Oh, definitely. For invasive ones, surgery always has risks. But even beyond that, for both invasive and non-invasive, we just don't know the long-term effects. What does decades of stimulation or recording do to brain tissue, to thinking, especially in kids whose brains are still developing?
Non-invasive seems safer, but you're saying it's not risk-free.
Not risk-free, no. The sources stress that even non-invasive methods could potentially cause irreversible changes in neuroplasticity, how the brain wires and rewires itself. We need way more long-term research, especially concerning children.
And one more area of concern sources brought up, using BCIs in the legal system or for security.
Yeah, another tricky one. Could BCIs become super lie detectors?
Mhm.
Could authorities access thoughts during investigations? That bumps right up against the right against self-incrimination, the right to remain silent.
And it gets weirder.
It does. Some research contexts even mention the potential, and this is still very speculative, to create false memories, or maybe even delete or alter real ones. Imagine what that does to the reliability of witness testimony in court.
That's deeply unsettling.
And then, as we touched on with DARPA, you have military and intelligence agencies actively exploring BCI applications, surveillance, control.
Mm.
The implications there are obviously huge.
So the risks aren't just personal. They hit our legal foundations, our rights, national security. And one source even connected BCIs to existential risk. That sounds pretty extreme.
It does sound extreme, but it was a point raised seriously in the material we looked at. Existential risks are the really big ones, things that could wipe out humanity or permanently cripple our future potential. Think nuclear war or maybe irreversible global totalitarianism.
And BCIs could contribute to that.
The argument wasn't that BCIs are an existential risk themselves, but that they could be a risk factor. Specifically, they could make a global, technologically enforced totalitarianism much more likely to happen and, critically, much harder to ever escape from once it's in place.
Because of that surveillance and control potential we talked about.
Precisely. If a regime could monitor internal dissent, subtly influence emotions, suppress rebellious thoughts directly at the neural level across a whole population, how would people ever organize resistance? How would independent thought even survive? It offers a level of control that dictators of the past could only dream of, potentially locking in totalitarianism like never before.
Okay, that's a sobering thought. So, given this landscape, incredible potential, but also these profound, even terrifying risks, how are we trying to manage this? What's happening with regulation, with ethics?
Well, the sources basically say we're playing catch-up. The tech is moving so fast, and our laws and rules haven't kept pace. There isn't really a single coherent legal framework designed specifically for neurotechnology.
We're using old laws for new problems.
Pretty much. Existing laws, data privacy rules like GDPR, laws about medical devices, even new AI regulations, they might cover some aspects, but they weren't built for direct brain interfaces. This leads to gaps, confusion, sometimes conflicts between laws, and a lot of non-medical BCIs, maybe wellness gadgets or gaming interfaces, might fall outside any serious regulation right now.
Like trying to regulate spaceships using traffic laws from the horse and buggy era.
That's not a bad analogy, actually. The old frameworks just don't quite fit. And this has sparked a really big debate. Do we need brand new human rights, people are calling them neuro rights, or can we just update and reinterpret the rights we already have?
Neuro rights, what kind of rights are being proposed?
Things like a right to cognitive liberty, basically. Your freedom to control your own mind without unwanted interference. Mental privacy, keeping your thoughts truly private. Mental integrity protection from, say, malicious brain hacking or manipulation. And psychological continuity, protecting your core sense of self from being fundamentally altered by technology against your will.
The argument being that existing rights, like freedom of thought, just didn't imagine this kind of direct intervention.
Exactly. But then others argue, well, rights like freedom of thought, privacy, bodily integrity are fundamental and broad. Maybe we just need to interpret them robustly for this new context.
Like saying thought includes all mental processes, even subconscious ones.
Something like that. Or making sure privacy clearly covers neural data. The worry from this side is that creating lots of very specific new rights might actually weaken the power of the fundamental rights we rely on. It's a complex legal and philosophical argument with smart people on both sides.
Okay, so the legal framework is lagging. What about practical steps? What are people suggesting we do now to manage the risks?
There seems to be broad agreement on needing anticipatory regulation, basically trying to get ahead of the problems, regulating early and often, not just reacting after harms occur. Developing ethical frameworks and guidelines, international bodies are working on them.
And transparency.
Huge emphasis on transparency. Calls for researchers and companies to be much more open about what they're doing, what the capabilities are, what the risks might be. Some sources contrasted Neuralink's initial secrecy around trials with, say, Facebook's stated aims for openness in their past BCI work, suggesting transparency builds trust.
What about protecting specific groups, like kids?
Absolutely critical. Suggestions included things like making sure child advocates are involved in developing policies, setting clear rules about who controls a child's neural data, the parents, the child, and, crucially, doing long-term studies focused specifically on how BCIs affect developing brains.
Is anyone talking about just banning certain uses?
Yes, that's definitely part of the conversation.
Yeah.
The idea of prohibiting or severely limiting certain enhancement uses, or maybe restricting how neural data can be collected or used through national laws or even international treaties. Some compare it to arms control, arguing some BCI applications might be too dangerous to allow without strict global controls.
And defending against misuse.
Right. There were calls for dedicated research on countering BCI systems, basically. Developing defensive technologies to protect people from malicious BCI interference. And also a strong message to the companies themselves. Be responsible. Avoid the hype. Don't oversell. Be honest about limitations and risks.
So it really boils down to a massive balancing act.
That's the core tension, isn't it? How do you encourage all the amazing innovation, capture the huge benefits, especially the medical ones, while at the same time protecting fundamental rights, human dignity, fairness, freedom? Maybe the challenge for this technology.
A challenge that needs constant attention, foresight, maybe even some humility as we develop tools this powerful.
Absolutely. It's arguably one of the most important conversations we need to be having right now.
Okay, so just to recap, we've dug into what BCIs are reading the brain, writing to it, the invasive ways, the non-invasive ways, and tried to sift the current reality from, well, some pretty significant hype.
We've seen the truly amazing medical uses happening now, and the non-medical possibilities that feel like they're leaping off the pages of science fiction.
And we've definitely spent time grappling with the risks. Deep risks to our privacy, our security, our autonomy, even our sense of who we are. We touched on those bigger societal and even existential questions.
And looked at the urgent, ongoing debate about how we guide this thing ethically and legally into the future.
It's so clear that this isn't just about gadgets or tech. It goes right to the core of what it means to be human, your thoughts, your identity, your agency in the world.
Yeah. It really forces us to reconsider things we've taken for granted.
Which leaves us with a final thought, really drawn straight from the material we reviewed. For basically all of human history, we've assumed our inner mental world, our thoughts, were fundamentally private, inaccessible from the outside. That idea is baked into concepts like freedom of thought.
Right. The skull is the ultimate privacy shield.
But if BCIs keep getting better at reading brain activity, if they can potentially influence our feelings and thoughts, if they integrate us ever more tightly with technology, how does that change things? What does freedom of thought actually mean in an age where technology can interact directly with the very process of thinking itself? Something to really chew on.